Hello, in today's video we're going more in depth with plotting and discovery writing. I know in my previous video I said figure out if you're a discovery writer or plotter before you begin writing, but the only way to actually know which one you are is to try it out, which involves you writing. And I still stand by that. The thing is, if you're a discovery writer and you plot a story, it will most likely kill it for you. For discovery writers, if they were to spend all that time plotting out a story, they will most likely lose the motivation to write it. My suggestion is not to write your passion project until you figure out which type of writer you are. You could work on something smaller, like fan fiction, a short story, a writing exercise where they give you the prompt. But back to learning about these words. You may be familiar with these sets of words: plotting versus pantsing, architect versus gardener, discovery versus outlining. Essentially, it's pretty much planning things out versus going with the flow. Here's a basic rundown of the words. Plotting, you plot things out. An architect. Think of an architect's blueprints, how they are very detailed and how they have to engineer things to make it structurally sound. Like how much has to be planned out in advance in order for them to make these grand builds. Outlining. It's when you outline your story. Pantsing, what I generally hear is someone who flies by the seat of their pants. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but according to Oxford Dictionary, it is relying on instinct rather than logic or knowledge. With the term gardener, think of someone where their idea is essentially the seed that they plant in the ground. They'll nurture it and then they'll just wait and see what comes out, or rather, how it comes out. Discovery. Think of it as someone that's like an adventurer. You blindly find your way, you discover. Honestly, I prefer using this term over pantsing just because pantsing, to me, just reminds me of the act of someone pulling down someone's pants as a prank. And I think gardener is a little bit too poetic for my tastes, so that's why I generally refer to myself as a discovery writer. Again, my suggestion is to try out both methods to see what suits you best. But I would like to say, keep in mind that you may need to change what type of writer you are in order to suit the story best, and I'll circle back to this later. On to pros and cons of each method. A pro for planning would be strong endings. With this method, you are likely to create an ending that wows people. Everything that you plan in advance and the way that you strategically and skillfully move the pieces on the board, that just leads to an ending with a huge impact. A con for plotting, however, is that people tend to get stuck in this state of it's not enough with planning in advance. Most commonly with world building, and if you've heard the term world builder's disease, and for those unfamiliar with the term, it is essentially when you just do nothing but world building. And the problem with being stuck planning and world building is that you never actually start writing the story. According to some people, another con of planning would be that it turns your story cold and analytical, essentially taking the life out of it. A pro for discovery writing is strong characters. People will often connect with the character and may not know where they're going, but they won't care because they're enjoying the ride to whatever destination. A con for discovery writing is that you would get a new idea for what will happen in your story, and it doesn't fit with what you've already written. So you'll scrap whatever you have and work towards this new idea, only for you to get another new idea that doesn't fit. So you scrap that. And do you see where I'm going with this and how it's a problem? A con to some people is that they end up feeling like they're lost and they don't know where they're going with their story, or it's too random. On to how to perform these methods. As I mentioned before, I am a discovery writer, so plotting is not my strong suit, but I will try. I often think back to school when they first teach you how to plan out a story. You have a beginning, a middle, an end. Essay structures are a bit different, where you have the introduction, and then the things that were in the introduction were you would write a paragraph about like each sentence that was in there. The thing is, how you plot your story would be specific to you. One way that someone plots their stories may not necessarily be the same as someone else, in that they may be a lot more detailed over how they plan it out or how much they divide it, and so I'm sure that there's plenty of examples of how people plot out stories somewhere on the internet. But for my example, I will be plotting out the movie Legally Blonde. For those only listening, I am going to be putting images on the screen of essentially this plot. And if you want to read more into details, as I'm only going to give a basic rundown of what's written here, then you can pause the screen. I start off by what I want the opening to be, getting to know the characters and the environment they are in. And then I follow that with the inciting incident and all the details around that, followed by the after effects of the inciting incident, which then I ended up making a section for the rising action, which I split into, I'm scrolling, 5 different parts. Afterwards, I wrote a section for the climax, followed by the falling action and the resolution. As I said before, you don't have to follow this exact outline. It can be however you want. You can section it however you want. If you want to do it by chapters, then go for it. Like if you want to do it per scene, go for it. This was just basically me showing an example of plotting. I know a lot of people would recommend reading the book Save the Cat. At first, I refused to read it. From what I was hearing, it screamed paint by numbers, but I did give it a shot. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to finish it. I will read the little passage that may give you some insight of why I couldn't finish the book. The number one thing a good logline must have, the most important element, is irony. My friend and former writing partner, the funny and fast typing Kobe Carr, pointed this out to me, and he's 100% correct. And that goes for whether it's a comedy or a drama. A cop comes to LA to visit his estranged wife, and her office building is taken over by terrorists. Die Hard. A businessman falls in love with a hooker he hires to be his date for the weekend. Pretty Woman. I don't know about you, but I think both these loglines, one from a drama, one from a romantic comedy, fairly reek of irony. A little bit ahead of this passage, it said, a newly married couple must spend Christmas Day at each of their 4 divorced parents' homes for Christmases. A just hired employee goes on a company weekend and soon discovers someone's trying to kill him. The Retreat. A risk-adverse teacher plans on marrying his dream girl, but must first accompany his overprotective future brother-in-law, a cop, on a ride along from hell. Ride along. All I'm gonna say is that if your examples for irony are stretchy at best, maybe that's all I should say. I don't want to spend the time bashing this book, but the reason why I brought up Save the Cat is because it may be helpful to you, and I'm going to leave it at that. Since discovery writing has to do with taking an idea and running with it, there's not much I can do to show you how to discover write, but I would like to read something that did inspire me to become a discovery writer. I'll have the article linked down below. and you can skip this portion if you don't want to hear me reading. Which I wouldn't blame you, I'm not that great at it. The article starts by Doug McLean. Novelists tend to fall into two camps. Some authors love their outlines. They plot and plan and schematize and think their way through problems. John Irving is one example. He spends months outlining his novels in advance, and when he puts pen to paper, he knows exactly what will happen. Other authors, meanwhile, feel their way through. When they sit down at the desk, anything can happen. They lose themselves in the dark on purpose and follow the light of strangeness and surprise. Flannery O'Connor, whose story revealed their structure over the course of many drafts, worked this way. Now it's switching to Andre Dubus III. Years ago, I read a book called Letters to a Fiction Writer, which asked about 20 established writers to send their best advice out into the world. There were a lot of heavy hitters in there offering truly wise and helpful advice, but the one that stayed with me over the years from Richard Bosch has become a sort of mantra for me. Do not think, dream. We're all born with imagination. Everyone gets one. And I really believe this is just from years of daily writing that good fiction comes from the same place as our dreams. I think the desire to step into someone else's dream world is a universal impulse that's shared by us all. That's what fiction is. As a writing teacher, if I say nothing else to my students, it's this. Here's the distinction. There's a profound difference between making something up and imagining it. You're making something up when you think out a scene, when you're being logical about it. You think, I need this to happen so some other thing can happen. There's an aspect of controlling the material that I don't think is artful. I think it leads to contrived work, frankly. No matter how beautifully written it might be, you can hear the false note in this kind of writing. This is my main problem when I was starting out. I was trying to say something. When I began to write, I was deeply self-conscious. I was writing stories hoping they would say something thematic, or just something that I was wrestling with philosophically. I've learned, for me at least, it's a dead road. It's writing from the outside in instead of the inside out. But during my very early writing, certainly before I publish, I began to learn characters will come alive if you back the fuck off. It was exciting and even a little terrifying. If you allow them to do what they're going to do, think and feel what they're going to think and feel, things start to happen on their own. It's a beautiful and exciting alchemy. And all these years later, that's the thrill I write to get, to feel things start to happen on their own. So I've learned over the years to free fall into what's happening. What happened then is you start writing something you don't even really want to write about. Things start to happen under your pencil that you don't want to happen and don't understand. But that's when the work starts to have a beating heart. Okay, I know it's one thing to quote Bosch, but what does it fucking mean? Dream with language? I think this is what happens. Habits of writing can be learned. We can choose concrete language over overtly abstract language. We can learn to use active verbs instead of passive verbs, to bring in at least 3 of the 5 senses to activate a scene. All these things we can be taught or learn on our own from reading. These are all parts of your toolbox, but that toolbox will always remain locked if the writer is not genuinely curious about what he or she is writing about. To me, that is the essential ingredient. Late in his life, Faulkner was asked what quality a writer needs most, and he said, not talent, but curiosity. I know the exact quote by heart. Insight, curiosity, to wonder, to mull, and to muse why it is man does what he does. And if you have that, talent makes no difference, whether you've got it or not. So you can dream by being curious enough to report back what's in front of your narrative eye. I love that line from E.L. Doctorow. Writing a novel is like driving at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you keep going until you get there. I've learned over the years to just report back anything I see in front of the headlights. Are they yellow stripes or white? What's on the side of the road? Is there vegetation? What kind? What's the weather? What are the sounds? If I capture the experience along the way, the structure starts to reveal itself. My grinding force and principle for shaping the story is to just follow the headlights. That's how the architecture is revealed. You must also be curious not just about perceptions and the physical world, but the character. Why man does what he does, as Faulkner said. Or another great line from Flannery O'Connor, the writer must write not about character, but with character. Or Eudora Welty, who the artistic art she holds most high is entering the private skin of another, writing with character. It's every 8 or 9 or 10 days with me when most of the entire writing session feels I'm just moving with the character, a strange observer in their chest some way as they go about their business. I think it's why a lot of writers write, is for that feeling. It's certainly why I write. I write longhand pencil and every other word's crossed out. The words I strike are not usually because they're cliched or not good words, but because they don't reflect the character's essential truth. Through a series of micro choices made as I'm writing a sentence, I'm trying to find the true word, the word that reflects the character's truth. Is that the smell she's smelling in that bar? Is that the light she's seeing in her car with the snow falling? Is that really what she hears and thinks and feels? Now, I have days when it doesn't happen. I would say most days. I would say I feel I've had good writing sessions every 9 or 10 days. That's not to say I don't have any contact on those other 8 or 9 days. It's like dancing with someone in the dark. You can catch glimmers of her face in the shadow light. But other days, the moon's right on her, and those are the days I write for. I'm one of these writers who rewrites pretty constantly all the time. If there's any moment that feels even slightly false, I cannot continue. Even if a character says one thing I don't quite believe or has an association I don't quite buy, I cannot continue. I've learned the hard way that this novel is a 12-story building. If there's a faulty brick on the 4th floor, that means that the 8 stories I've put on top have to go. So I am constantly a vicious, merciless rewriter when it comes to the truth. Now, dreaming your way through a story is very useful at first, for the first draft, maybe the first 2. But once the revision process begins, you've got to change your approach. Bosch would be the first to say that once you dream it through, try to look at the results the way a doctor looks at an x-ray. You've got to be terribly smart about it. In the secondary period, you get more rational and logical about what you've dreamt, while still cooperating with the deeper truths of what you've made. So once I have a beginning, middle, and end, I walk away from it for at least 6 months and don't look at it. At least 6 months. To revise means to see again. Well, how can you see again when you just looked at it 10 days ago? No. Have 2 seasons go between you. And then when you pick it up and read it, you actually forget some of what happens in the story. You forget how hard it was to write those 12 pages, and you become tougher on it. You see closer to what the reader is going to see. What I look for at this point is dramatic tension, forward movement, and frankly, beauty. I try to make it as truly itself as possible, and that's when the major plotting comes in. Plot, not as a noun, but as a verb, the ordering of events and material. I get really merciless. I don't care if I spent a year writing pages 1 through 96. If I feel some real energy on page 93, and I think that should be page 1, those first 92 pages are fucking gone. A merciless reviser is in a much better position to write a really good book than one who hasn't got the stomach for it. That may be the distinction between what makes a really good book and a great book. It's very difficult to achieve this dream state, and it requires a lot of courage, and I don't think it's going to happen unless you can cultivate 2 qualities in yourself, which William Stanford, the poet, taught me when he said, The poet must put himself in a state of receptivity before writing. Stanford said you know you're being receptive when A, you're willing to accept anything that comes, no matter what it is, and B, you're willing to fail. But Americans are very impatient with failure. I think one of the many reasons people don't end up living their authentic lives is because they're afraid of failing. They don't take chances, and I understand it. This is very risky, terrifying territory writing this way, but it's the only way I can do it. Frankly, I just feel so alive when I write that way. Here's how it happens for me. The first thing I do is go to my office, which is a nearly soundproof cave in my basement. But I also have to write in hotels and on planes and shit all the time, so. The big ritual is that I read a few poems. I don't write poetry, but I read poetry daily. I must have 500 volumes of poetry, and I read it just to, sprinkle flower petals on the bed and put a little Luther Vandross on to get me in the mood, and it brings me down into a pretty good meditative state. I write longhand pencil every day in composition notebooks, even on my birthday. Today's my birthday, and I think I had a good session. I read some poems, and then I put on some headphones and play some music. While I'm listening to music, I'm just typing the previous day's handwritten work into the computer. Then I turn off the music, rewrite some sentences. I don't go nuts, just making sure I believe everything that happened. I know that later I'll be rewriting constantly, and I don't want to go to that rational, critical, logical part of my brain too much. That can get in the way of the dream state. Then I go back, get rid of the machine, and sharpen my Blackwing 602 Palomino pencil, and I just go at it. It's a ritual. It's O'Connor. There's a certain grain of stupidity that the writer of fiction can hardly do without, and this is the quality of having to stare. And she goes on to say that writing is waiting, and I think what she means is you're not waiting for inspiration. You're staring or waiting for the image or the moment or the smell or the sound to emerge, and when you start to write it, just trust me that things happen. I really wrestle with religious faith, but I don't wrestle with this. I used to think I had no religious faith of any kind. I've been a father of 3 for years, and I never prayed until I became a father for the first time at the age of 33. I don't believe in God, but I believe in something. Something's out there. And the main reason I believe that something's out there, something mysterious and invisible, but real, largely has come from my daily practice of writing. There's a great line from an ancient anonymous Chinese poet. We poets knock upon the silence for an answer in music. The way I write, the way I encourage people I work with to write is exactly this. Trust your imagination, free fall into it, and see where it brings you to. It's scary, it's unorganized, and you're going to have to prepare yourself for some major fucking rewriting, and maybe cut 2 years of work. I know putting up this kind of uncertainty is very difficult. We bring ourselves into these rooms, we bring all our hopes, all our longings, all our shadows. What writing asks of us is the opposite of what being in the American culture asks of us. You're supposed to have a 5-year plan. Young people now are so cautious. Oh, we can't get married until we have a house. Oh, we can't have a baby until we have 20 grand in the bank. These crazy, careful people. Look, life is short if you live 100 years. Better to die naked and reckless and with passion and not be afraid to fuck up and fail. Sometimes the fear is, I won't publish the novel by the time I'm 30, or my mother's sick, she'll never see me publish a book. Or all my friends have published, when am I going to publish? All of these demons we bring to the desk, often subconsciously buried, and I think it's really important to be clear on what's at stake for you. I think one of the downsides of MFA programs is they make people really career conscious. Fuck career. Let me tell you something. I'm so grateful to have had a publishing career so far. It's how I make most of my living. It's been an incredible blessing. It's helped me take better care of my family than I could have ever thought possible. But I do not ever think about career when I'm in my writing cave. I do not. I try not to think. I dream. It's my mantra. I just get in there and try to be these people. It's not so I can write a book and get paid and have another book tour, though those are good problems to have. It's because I feel an almost sacred obligation to these spirits who came before, to sit with them and write their tale. I think the article says essentially what it's like to be a discovery writer. You do not think, you dream. And I think that's a wonderful mantra to have. Do not think, dream. Okay, hopefully at this point you have a better grasp on these two methods. And now it's time to talk about the third, being a hybrid or planter. This is where you do both. Brandon Sanderson is an example of a hybrid writer. He plans out his stories, but he discovery writes the characters. I'm sure there's a few variations of how to be a hybrid writer, but I'm not sure there's much more I can add on that. To circle back to what suits the story. As I mentioned before, I'm a discovery writer, and although most of my stories can be written without me needing to change my ways, I do have a high fantasy series that forces me to be a hybrid. Trust me, it's been a really long and slow process, inching forward bit by bit, because I'm really clashing with the plotting bit, but it's what's needed for this story. And so I would say to you, consider what method your story needs in order to best come to fruition. And I think that about wraps up everything I wanted to cover today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my video. I hope it was helpful. Don't forget to wear sunscreen, and I hope to see you again. Bye for now.